Let us now take a look at some examples of inheritance. We have a base class which has a constructor that prints base, a derived class which has its own members, right? And this constructor initializes y and prints derived, and print function prints x and y. So what is the output of this program? If you take a closer look at this program, you will notice that this program will generate compiler error. Why? Because this derived class is not calling any constructor of the base class. So when you construct an object of the derived class, base class is also part of it, right? So base class things should also be initialized. And here we are not calling base class constructor. So if you do not call base class constructor yourself explicitly, what happens? Compiler tries to call default constructor of the base class. Here in this example, since we have made our own parameterized constructor, compiler does not create a default constructor in the base class. So this base class does not have a constructor which can be called without any parameter. And this derived class will try to call the default constructor without any parameter because you have not called any constructor here. So by default constructor is called and default constructor is not present in the base class. So that is why you will get compiler error. Now to fix this compiler error, you need to call parameterized constructor of the base class. How do we call parameterized constructor of the base class? We use initializer list. Now I have modified this program so that it compiles and runs fine. What I have done now, I have passed two parameters to this derived, one parameter to initialize base. So base is initialized using initializer list. We pass the required parameter a here, then we initialize the derived class member, then we print derived inside the derived class constructor. So when we run this program, what do we get as an output? We get base, we get derived, and then we get 10 and 20 because we are calling print function. So what did we learn in this program? When we create an object of derived class, it first calls the base class constructor, then it calls the derived class constructor. And if you do not call the base class constructor explicitly, then default constructor of the base class is called, a constructor that does not take any parameters. And if your base class does not have any default constructor, then you will get compiler error if you have not called any constructor and if you're creating an object of the derived class. So how do you fix this compiler error? You explicitly call the base class constructor with parameters using initializer list. So I have modified the previous program again. I have replaced protected with private. Rest of the things are same. Now, can you guess the output of this program? This program will not compile now. Why? Because this x is private in the base class and your derived class function tries to access x. So whatever is private cannot be accessed outside the class. X is there in the derived class object, but not accessible through derived class functions, right? Because whatever is there in the base class is part of the derived class also, but it's not accessible through derived class functions because it's private in the base class. Only the base class functions can access it. So we get compiler error in this program if we replace protected with private. I have again modified the previous program. This time I have declared x in the public section and I'm trying to access x using d.x using derived class object. Will it compile? Yes, it will compile because it's public in the base class and we are using public inheritance. So whenever you use public inheritance, public members, they remain public. So it is public in the derived class and it's accessible outside the derived class also because it is inherited as public. So d.x can be accessed in main or anywhere else through an object of the derived class because it is public here. It was public in base class and inherited as public. I have further modified this program. Now I am using protected in place of public in inheritance. Can you guess the output now? This program will not compile now because this is public here, but when you inherit using protected keyword, it becomes protected in the derived class. So this protected will not be accessible outside the derived class. So you will get compiler error in this program. I have again changed this program. I have replaced protected with private now. So inheritance access is now private. Whatever is there public or protected in the base class, it becomes private in the derived class, and private of the base class is never accessible. So what will happen now? You will get compiler error because this X is private here in the derived class. So if you try to access d.x, you are trying to access a private data member of a class outside the class. So you will have compiler error in this program.